Hello, everyone. So, obviously, we are not in class right now, and it's the first lecture of the semester. What I want to talk with you about today is obviously what the book is discussing. We're not going to talk about whether it's right or wrong, we're only talking about what the book is talking about. And let's put ourselves in the shoes or in the context of prehistoric man. What do they have in their world? They have bone, stone, and that's really it. And hide for anything else. Obviously, this is a rendering or an imagination of what prehistoric man might have been like, but with those very simple stone tools and those very simple resources, they could achieve great things. Now, when we look at these caves, some of these pictures are not going to be in your textbook. I want you to be able to see these and really appreciate the beauty and the grandeur of the whole thing. And something else that I really want you to be aware of is this man right here. So this man, let's say he's probably 5'8", 5'10". The average size of men right now in America is like 5'8", 5'7", believe it or not. And here's the crazy thing. Ancient man, prehistoric man, was nearly just a little over half that, under around 4 feet tall. They weren't even 5 feet tall. So how could a primitive man with no access to ladders, no access to scaffolding and tools and rope and all the beautiful things we have now make drawings like this on the ceiling of these raw, unforgiving caves? Why? Why do it? Why go through the trouble? Moreover, what does it all mean, Basil? Why go through the trouble with their little resources when they're already busy running away from dinosaurs, running away from tigers and big cats and bugs and who knows what else? I mean, let's think about it. At this time, what is primitive man's two main motivations? One, to survive, and two, to reproduce. So you run away from the big dinosaur, ha 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 ha, I want to make some babies. You make babies, but you need food. Vicious cycle. But through all this, they find the time to make images. So at this point, if we were in class, I'd be asking you guys, what do you think this is? What does it mean? Looking at this first, let's think about the pose. If you're in class right now, I would ask you, I would challenge you to stand up, spread your legs apart, drop down, get that butt low, and try to assume that pose. Stretch your arms out. What does that make you think of? What does that make you feel? Some experts would say this is a powerful pose. Some people might say, well, that's really just a lazy guy laying back in bed waiting for something. And believe it or not, I've heard one person say that that is a natural pose to defend yourself against wild animals. So there are many possible interpretations. When you add to the fact these startling lines, these patterns, are they ribs? Are they veins? Could they be, clothing, or could they be power? Could it be some kind of spiritual power that goes through him as he goes Super Saiyan on whatever is coming around him? We just don't know. The few things that we can be aware of, the pose of the body is important, and apparently when they have so little resources, it's important to make this image and to give the head this particular styling. There's no identity to the figure, but that headdress or that hairstyle is prominent. Now, obviously they have some advancements, there is some finesse and sophistication to this primitive culture, but do we have any common links to this prehistoric man? I'm inclined to say yes. And it goes back to what I was talking about before. If man is not reproducing If man is not trying to reproduce or trying for the chance to reproduce, then it's probably spending time trying to survive, whether it's gathering food, hunting food, preparing food, or storing food. Everything else aside from that, we could say, is an assertion of their identity. Children do this all the time. And pay close attention to what's happening there, because it's going to be connecting to our next chapter. Now let's get some vocab in. When we look at these cave drawings, there are three main words we need to be aware of. Here, in the bulls, the pigment is black. The support is rock. And the binder isn't so much of a factor with charcoal, but if we were talking about paint, then obviously the binder would be, egg white in the case of acrylic. It would be oil, linseed oil in the case of oil paint, or acrylic gel in the case of acrylic. The binder is what keeps those, the powdered rock that is the pigment all together, or perhaps the ground down plant matter in the case of burnt ochre or sienna or umber. Rather, raw umber, burnt sienna. Mix those up. Now, I said before that these weren't really sophisticated people, but when you look at these drawings, I'm not ashamed to say that those drawings are better than some of my Drawing 1 students. Look at this. They have taken the time to show the eyes, the nose, the mouth, even, bits of, the whiskers with great detail. I ask you this, is this the drawing of a person that was practicing the same animal over and over? Or is it a drawing of multiple beasts running, walking, passing by? It's hard to tell. It's hard to make that, decision between the two, or make that division between the two. What we can see, though, is a sincere and really quite sophisticated attempt at recreating life as they perceive it, even here. But this is a really stark contrast to what we're looking at here, isn't it? This is not realistic, this is not proportional, this is very abstract, very symbolic. Let's remember again where this is made. This is yards and yards and hundreds of yards below the surface, far from the maddening, unforgiven wilds. In this kind of space, primitive man would stand about that tall. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? As of fall, summer last year, it was discovered that men didn't actually make these incredible paintings. These were made by women. As to how we know that, it involves amber, not so much amber, sorry, I'm thinking of something else. It involves calcium deposits, the minerals and water that drips down into the rocks, and DNA left behind by the women that were there. So, hello, some of the earliest artists were not men, but in fact were women. But let's think about the process. Was it one woman that made it, or was it multiple women? Most of the time, we're inclined to think that it had to be multiple women, but were these women ninjas? Were they, there's no evidence of ladders, there's no evidence of support structures or scaffolding. How did these women, these visionaries, create this? That's one of the interesting questions. But then thinking about why do it? Why go through the trouble? The most common answers: to educate. As they are sitting in the cave, in the safety of their cave, they're telling their children, now looky here, you don't want to go near this beast, but you do want to hunt for this beast. This one, it's got big horns, but when you eat it, it's really good. And in a few thousand years from now, we're going to start making burgers, and that's going to be super awesome. So obviously education is one possible thing. Perhaps it's an act of devotion. Perhaps they draw these animals pouring their hearts desires into landing that big kill. Perhaps it's a prayer. God of the fields, or gods of the fields, or spirit of the beast, please give me the strength to kill this thing so I may feed my family, so we may survive, so I can make more babies and kill more beasts. So there's a didactic element. There is, there's an educational element. There is a spiritual element. It could be doodles. Why does anyone do anything? Perhaps they were bored. We could go on and on about the possible reasons, but what I want you to do is think. Like I said in our previous lecture, be aware of what you're thinking. Be aware of why you're thinking that. Think about context. What we see here in primitive man is two distinct roads. Okay, on the one side, art is supposed to be realistic. It's supposed to be beautiful. It's not supposed to be abstract. That's just trash. And then you've got the other person saying, no, realistic artwork is boring. It needs to be beautiful and colorful and fun and sexy. It needs to explore and express the soul. Even then, thousands of years before, man was already playing with two completely different gears. They made realistic artwork and they made abstract artwork. Is one better than the other? No, of course not. Like any tool, hold on a second. My computer wanted to restart. I'll just do it later. Where was I? Like now, we have different tastes. But really what we have here is a tool. Perhaps on the one hand, they represented beasts to educate, to illuminate. Whereas on the other hand, they created abstract symbols to communicate a language that transcended these realistic things. Perhaps the spiritual was expressed in an abstract manner, whereas the practical was expressed in a realistic manner. Moving on, I just want you to be aware of representation and symbolic representation, symbolic language. This is going to continue, throughout the centuries until now, and continue on even after we're gone. Moving on to sculpture, we have one of the greatest sculptures, one of the oldest sculptures we know of, the Venus of Willendorf. Now, when we look at this woman, she is mighty, mighty. I mean, she's got the big hips. She's got the huge, fertile breasts. We don't know if she's got feet or not. Perhaps they were broken off. Perhaps they're not worried about feet. Maybe they just couldn't sculpt feet. We see that her hands are resting upon her breasts, and a lot of attention has been given to her midsection and to her head. Now, why would they do that if they've gone to all this trouble and they can already show fingers? If we look here, we can see bits of the female genitalia in some detail. We can see bits of the fingers and hands in the detail there. What would this mean? Could that be hair? Could that be a mask? Let's think about those previous directions we were talking about. On the one hand, it's abstract. On the other hand, it is the Venus of Willendorf is a combination, a wonderful combination of the two. But guess what, guys? The Venus of Willendorf is not the only one. Venus figures would continue to pop up around many different parts of Europe and Eurasia, whether it was carved out of stone. And that brings up a really strong point. This stone is particularly very, super very hard. So imagine, if you would, a caveman, cavewoman, sitting there, spending countless hours with their stone tools, and the more they use the stone tool, the worse it gets, and eventually it's going to break and they have to find another one. This is not just going to your store and buying a new chisel. This is a laborious act of devotion. They are devoted and committed to making this sculpture. It's safe to say that this would have been a focus for fertility. We understand this more when we look at this Venus figure here. Now, this is not in the textbook, but I want you to be able to understand the context. Here, the figure has not even been given a head. Rather, the Venus is worn around the neck like a necklace. So this kind of gives us more proof or more of an idea that the Venus figure was a focus of faith and hope, that you may have fertility, whether it's food or whether it's children. We see here, though, the woman is holding below her breasts, maybe holding her belly, or perhaps reclining with her hands on her belly. And you can't help but laugh because she kind of looks like a stuffed chicken or a turkey with those legs like that. But this was actually found in northern Europe. It was carved from a horn of a narwhal. That's the fish that looks like a unicorn, that giant horn there. And if we travel far to the south, to the Czech Republic, we'll find the Venus of Vestonice. And this is one of the oldest pieces of ceramic work, so it transcended stone and horn. Early man exploring ceramics would continue to create Venus figures. Again, attention being paid to fertile breasts, wide birthing hips, not so much attention to the face, so it's not about a particular woman, it's about the idea of a fertile woman, a woman that can give and grow. Moving to a different type of sculpture, we have sculpture in relief, and yet again, another Venus, the Venus of Lossel. But this time she has the same features, and oh, she actually has feet. Awesome. We don't see, again, her face, but she has what appears to be a horn. Now, perhaps it's a horn for drinking. Perhaps it's a horn for calling or hearing. We don't know. A sculpture in relief is not a sculpture you can walk all the way around. It's something you just look at on one side. And so relief means it's carved from a surface. If it's just a slight carving, it's low relief. If it's carved very far from the surface, then it is high relief. Understanding those differences will make a big deal when we move on into the next chapter. We're going to continue looking at sculpture on a very different scale. Now, lots of old retired men with metal detectors have walked around these things. Amateur archaeologists, treasure hunters, people that believe in aliens, all kinds of people. They have not found any graves, so it's safe to say this is not a graveyard. Of course, if we were in class right now, I'd be asking you, what are these? Those of you that are Tolkien fans might recognize some of the words. These are menhirs. Men meaning stone, the root, and here meaning long. It's not so much, at this point, it's not so much a matter of whether you like it or not. I'm more curious about your ideas on what do you think they were trying to do. And here's the crazy thing. While you're thinking about that, you have to remember, you really need to remember, these stones weigh 300, 700, 1,000 pounds. And guess what? That's how much they weigh now. Think back 10,000 plus years and those stones were even bigger. So why go through the trouble? Menhirs, excuse me, menhirs are arranged in various formations, whether it looks like a graveyard or whether it looks like railroad markers or highway markers. That's a lot of trouble to mark a road. One might say, well, in prehistoric times there was a lot of snow. Maybe they needed that. You know, maybe aliens needed a place to land their ships. There are lots of ideas. When you look at these, when you think about how wind, water, ice, other stones have worn these down, it just fills you full of ideas as to what it might have been. And it also raises the question, will people think the same thing 1,000, 10,000 years from now if they visit a beach called Normandy? Will they still know that that beach was called Normandy? And will they recognize the stones that were left there? Will the bodies still be there? No. But the stones, they might. So think about it. Man has learned to stack a stone up. That's kind of cool, but you know, at some point they're hanging out, man, you know, they're drinking blood from the heart of a beast they just killed and said, dude, What if we take 2 stones and put another one on top of it? Dude, booga booga, that's an awesome idea. This is the post and lintel. Okay, so post and lintel is the great grandfather and the first architectural element, the first feat of engineering of ancient man. But prepare your mind to be blown, because let's look at some great examples. These are stones that weigh 7 tons. And there's really not much room for people inside them. And what are these stone structures called? Anyone? They are called dolmens, table stones. They come in various sizes, various arrangements. And let me tell you something. This next slide is going to blow your mind, I think. When you remember what I told you before, prehistoric man was not much taller than about this to here. We're talking 4 feet tall. And obviously they didn't have the tools that we have, and they couldn't go to Home Depot or Walmart. They didn't have beer to call a bunch of friends over and say, hey, here's a case of beer, help me move a stone. Is it all done in one lifetime? Does a family work towards this? Is this the equivalent of a hotel or a place for everyone to stay? If we travel far over to Belarus, then we'll see a very unique type of dolmen. These dolmens were not big enough for families to stay in. Now, obviously, this one is rather large, whereas this one does not have much room for much more than a person to stand there and go, oh, well, it's not so windy in here. Whereas here, even the small prehistoric man could not fit entirely in that hole. So why do it? Especially go through all the trouble of carving so well this stone. Perhaps you wanted to store food. Perhaps you store your dead, hack up the body, put them in there. Oh, they're in a safer place now. The animals can't eat them. Possibly. Perhaps it's a spiritual thing. Perhaps you keep your, toys in it or something. I wonder, do we still do anything like that now? And they make jokes about men, they make jokes about simple men being like cavemen, but do we still have a desire to create dolmens? I'm inclined to say yes. And I'm pretty confident that at least half of you in class have done this at least once. While we're looking at this, I want to introduce 2 words you don't hear much in the book, but you need to be aware of it because it helps you better understand art. Those 2 words, I want you to write them down. They're form and function. So, what is the function? Well, I need a shelter. Okay, let's get some stones. We'll stack them on top of each other, and there's the form. There's the function. It's going to protect me. That's enough. But then there's form, and form is appearance. So this guy, he's happy, but someone else, well, they've built it, and they want something more. So they take their sheets. They put sheets on top. They get a blanket, My fortress is awesome, and it's beautiful. Ladies and gentlemen, these are very basic techniques that mankind is starting out with. We're only going to add more techniques, more technology to that. Right now, man really is very similar to these children. Children playing with Play-Doh, carving little patterns into the Play-Doh, carving what they can and moving blocks like so many cushions from a couch. Those markings, those carvings are going to get more and more sophisticated. I want you to be aware of those key terms. I want you to be aware of the cromlech, the dolmen, the menhir. I want you to be aware of the Venus of Willendorf and what fertility figures can mean. And see the connection as we move from the Paleolithic, this is the Paleolithic, the Old Stone Age, into the next chapter and the Neolithic, the New Stone Age. As always, if you have any questions, you can drop by my office. You can email me at tpfernandez@asub.edu. You can call my office at 501-882-8913 or drop by the art office and talk to Mrs. Carter. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you in class.